Welcome to the Healthy Diet session of HealthFest. Here with me is dietitian Dr. Caoileann Murphy, who has over 9 years of experience working in nutrition and research, with a master's in sport and exercise nutrition and a PhD in nutrition, exercise and health. Caoileann is currently the dietitian on Dublin Cookery School's Fit Food programme and has worked as part of a team of nutritionists for RTE's Operation Transformation for the past 2 years. Whew, that's long-winded. Caoileann, you're very welcome.
Thanks a million. Happy to be here.
Now, we have a fabulous array of food here, lots of different colours, different food groups. Talk to me about the importance of including a healthy diet as part of your lifestyle.
Well, a healthy diet is absolutely critical. It provides all the nutrients that our body needs to function optimally. So it's not only important for our health, but also our sports performance. And really, the key to healthy eating is all about balance. So that means including a wide variety of foods from each of the different food groups. And the Irish Department of Health have published the food pyramid. And that shows us the different food the different food groups and how they should each contribute to our diet. So we don't have a pyramid today, but we do have all the food groups laid out on the table.
Lovely.
So I'll talk you through it. So the first one here is the fruit and vegetable shelf or food group. So it's important here to include a wide variety of different colours because each of the different colours represents different nutrients and other protective compounds like phytochemicals that are in them. And we know that teenagers are actually not eating enough fruit and veg. Only about 10% are meeting the guideline, which is 5 to 7 portions a day.
10%?
10%, so it's absolutely tiny.
Okay.
This is this food group here, you can see on the table, is the largest. So that shows that these foods should contribute the biggest proportion to our diet and we should be basing all our meals and snacks around them.
Okay.
So that's fruit and veg. The next shelf then is the whole grain cereals, breads, rice, pasta and potatoes group.
Which people often see as the kind of,
They tend to be a bit scared of them. But
Yes.
there's absolutely no need. That's not true at all. So these foods provide a really important source of carbohydrate, which is important fuel for our body. And it's particularly important if you're doing a lot of sport. So that's why the number of portions we need from this group each day depends on our activity levels and also whether we're male or female. By going for the whole grain and the brown versions, like the brown versions of the bread or pasta or rice, and also keeping the skins on potatoes, that can increase your fibre intake. And fibre, again, is something teenagers aren't getting enough of, and it's really important for a few different reasons. It's really important for our gut health, so it is actually food for the little microorganisms that live in our gut, and it also helps to keep us feeling fuller for longer, so we're less likely to overeat, which can lead to weight gain. So that's that group.
Great.
The next one is the dairy group. So this is the milk, cheese, yogurt group. This group is a really rich source of calcium. So in particular for teenagers who have growing bones, they need 5 portions from this group a day. So a portion would be a yogurt or a glass of milk or about 2 thumbs worth of cheese.
Okay.
And then moving on, we have the legumes, meat, fish, eggs, and nuts group. So these foods provide a good source of protein. And we need protein to build and repair our tissues in our body, like our muscle. So we're recommended to have 2 portions of those a day. And then the last group is over here. This is the spreads, fats, and oils group.
Okay.
So people, again, like the carbohydrates, tend to be a bit scared of fat, and there's no need to be. We definitely need to include some healthy fats in our diet. So that's things like olive oil and rapeseed oil, and they're better options than things like butter, which is a saturated fat, which isn't as good for us, but it's okay to include in small amounts.
Okay.
So the oils are important to include, but don't go too crazy on the amount because they are very high in calories. So just watch the portion, but include a small amount. And then what we don't have on the table is the last group, which actually on the food pyramid isn't even attached to the pyramid, it's kind of floating above it. And that's because we don't need those foods for a healthy diet. And these are foods that are high in fat and sugar and salt. So like cakes, crisps, chocolate,
The stuff we love.
The stuff we love. So it's okay to include them in small amounts. People shouldn't be scared of those foods either, but just to have them as treats no more than once or twice a week, small portion.
Okay. And for teenagers, so for our viewers today, mainly 4th, 5th years, what nutrients in particular should they definitely make sure that they have in their diet?
So there's a couple of things that teenagers particularly need to watch out for. And the first one is calcium. And the reason is that between the ages of 9 and 18, we have our highest requirement for calcium. So if you're between 9 and 18, you need more calcium than anyone else walking around Ireland today. And so by getting those foods from our dairy products, that's why they need 5 portions as opposed to 3 portions, which is the other ages. And we can ensure that we're getting all the calcium that we need. And this is a really critical time for teenagers because they're building those bones. And if they don't get enough calcium in their diet, they don't have enough calcium to build as strong bones as they possibly can.
Okay.
And if they build the strongest bones they can through getting enough calcium, eating a good diet and being physically active, they're the bones that they have for the rest of their life. So you want them to be as strong as possible, and that will reduce your risk of having brittle bones called osteoporosis and fractures later in life.
Which is what I was going to ask. So beyond calcium and bone health, what are the other benefits of dairy?
So there's a number of other important nutrients that we can find in dairy. So things like potassium, which helps to control our blood pressure, iodine, so we need that to make our thyroid hormones, which are important for regulating our metabolism. There is also high quality protein or complete protein, which we need to help build muscle and help to repair other tissues, and then B vitamins, which have a number of different roles in the body. So that's another good reason to include dairy. And we're also getting some new evidence to show that including dairy foods in the diet can reduce our risk of certain diseases. So for example, there's strong evidence it can reduce the risk of colorectal cancer, and in particular the fermented dairy foods like yogurt, that seems to reduce our risk of type 2 diabetes. So there's a few different reasons to include it. And then actually, in addition to calcium, and other nutrients that are important for teenagers to watch out for are vitamin D. So vitamin D also important for our bones. It helps us to absorb the calcium that we eat in foods. And in Ireland, so vitamin D is known as the sunshine vitamin. That's because we actually make it when the sun rays hit our skin. But in Ireland, we actually can't make it in our skin because of our weather and our latitude between October and March every year. So we have to get it from our diet. And the main sources of vitamin D in the diet are oily fish and also egg yolk.
Okay.
But even with those sources, it can be quite difficult to get all the vitamin D that we need from our diet. So teenagers may want to supplement. Well, in fact, everyone may want to supplement. And then the last one would be iron.
Okay.
Because in particular for teenage girls, when they start menstruating, their iron needs go up. And we know from research studies that were carried out in Ireland that teenage girls in Ireland, only about 41% of them are getting enough iron.
Okay.
So our main source of iron would be the red meat. So that is lamb and beef. So that's a really good source of iron. But if you don't include those in the diet, or in fact, even if you do, there are some other plant-based sources of iron. So that would be things like fortified breakfast cereals, dried fruit, and beans. The one thing to be wary of with the plant-based sources of iron is that it's not quite as easy for our body to absorb that iron and to use it as from the meat sources, the red meat sources. But there's a little trick that teenagers can use, or anyone can use, and that's to have some food that contains vitamin C alongside the non-heme or the plant-based sources of iron, and that will actually help you to absorb the iron better. So that's things like peppers, tomatoes, oranges, strawberries, all high in vitamin C, and that'll help you to absorb that plant-based iron more easily.
Okay, brilliant. And then in terms of training and sport, a lot of our viewers will be into that. What foods do you recommend, say, for after training? Say you do a really hard session and for energy or for growth and repair or whatever that kind of thing, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so in recovery, there are three things we need to be mindful of, and these are the 3 R's. So that's refuel, rehydrate, and repair.
Okay.
So we'll start off with refuel. So if you do an exercise session, particularly if it's very intense, most of the energy, or a big portion of the energy that you use up, will be carbohydrates. And those are stored in our body around our muscles and around our liver. And when we deplete those, and then we go to try and do another session of exercise without topping them up, we won't perform as well as we could in that next session. So by eating some carbohydrate after exercise, you can help to top them up. So these would be examples of our carbohydrate foods: potatoes, rice, pasta. We also can get some carbohydrates from fruit and some vegetables. And then the dairy foods also contain some naturally occurring carbohydrates. So that's refuel. Next, we have rehydrate. So if you do a hard exercise session, you're going to sweat, you're going to lose fluid, you're going to lose electrolytes. So we need to replace those. And most people, when they think about rehydrating, they think about the commercially available sports drinks. And yes, they do help to rehydrate you, but what a lot of people don't know is that there's a lot of science to show that milk-based drinks are just as good, if not better, at rehydrating.
Okay.
And that's because milk not only contains the fluid, but also the electrolytes. So that's another good option. Or water can also be rehydrating, but if you drink water by itself, it doesn't have the electrolytes, so it's not the best option. But if you have a meal, like your lunch or your dinner after your training session, and you have some water alongside it, that's another good way to rehydrate because you're getting the electrolytes from the food.
Got you.
And then the last R is the repair. So when we do an exercise session, our rate of muscle building goes up. And that's really important, not only for muscle growth, but also because you're going to repair any damage that happened to the muscle during the exercise session. And it's going to actually build new muscle that's stronger and better and performs better at whatever sport you're training for. So in order to help that muscle build, we need the building blocks. So those building blocks come from protein foods. So examples of protein are our group with our fish, meat, beans, eggs, and then we also get some protein in the dairy. They're another good source of, the dairy foods are another good source of protein.
Okay.
So not only are these foods, if we eat them after exercise, going to provide the building blocks to help repair and build our muscle, but they actually also send a signal to our muscle that further ramps up the rate of muscle building, so it actually amplifies the effect of exercise.
Okay.
So ideally, after a session, you want some carbohydrates, you want some proteins, and you want some fluid and electrolytes.
Fabulous. Okay, vegan and plant-based diets. There seems to be an increase in interest in them. And of course, you know, this is our important section of the table, so it is great. But there are risks, or there are maybe effects, side effects of that diet that maybe aren't great in terms of losing out on certain things.
So it's probably a good idea to start by defining what a plant-based diet is, because there's a lot of misconceptions around that. So a lot of people think that a plant-based diet is a plant-only diet, but in fact a plant-based diet is one that's rich in plants. So that could range from the healthy eating guidelines or the food pyramid, so what you're seeing in front of you, that's an example of a plant-based diet, all the way through to vegetarians who exclude some animal products, to vegans who are plant-only and exclude all animal products like meat, chicken, fish, dairy, eggs. So are there any risks associated with a vegan diet? Well, a vegan diet can absolutely be healthy and balanced, but it definitely requires a bit more knowledge and a bit more effort. Because if you start excluding whole food groups, those food groups are important sources of nutrients, so you need to be careful to replace those nutrient gaps. So key nutrients that vegans need to watch out for are firstly calcium, and especially for teenagers because they have that extra high need for calcium. So we get most of our calcium in the dairy products, and so we need to just be careful to replace them with other alternatives like an alternate plant-based drink, like a soy-based or nut-based drink. Soy-based are a better option because they are higher in protein, but what you need to be really careful is to make sure you're choosing one that is fortified or enriched with added calcium. Then the next nutrient is iodine. Our main sources of iodine in the Irish diet are dairy foods and also white fish. So if you're not eating those, you need to get your iodine somewhere else. Some of the plant-based drinks are starting to fortify with iodine, so try to go for one of them. But if there is no iodine in your plant-based drink, you need to be supplementing. Next one is vitamin B12. We get that from the animal foods. So all vegans really need to be supplementing with vitamin B12, or else, or in addition, they need to be getting some fortified foods like B12 fortified cereals and nutritional yeast. Next one is iron. We've talked about that before, so make sure you're getting your plant-based sources of iron and you're having some vitamin C to help absorb them. Protein is the next one. So the animal foods like fish, eggs and dairy foods are rich in protein. So you need to make sure that you're including some pulses like peas, beans, lentils, tofu, soy. Those are plant-based sources of protein. One thing to watch out for is that the animal foods like dairy and meat, fish, chicken and eggs, they have all 9 of the essential amino acids that we need, that our bodies need. Whereas the plant-based sources like peas, beans and lentils, they are low in 1 or more of the essential amino acids. So the take-home point is that if you actually have a good mix and match of the different plant-based protein sources, then you can get all the different amino acids that you need. So basically, don't just eat chickpeas, eat a wide range of different peas, beans, lentils and tofu and soy.
So do your research.
Do your research, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now that we have our main meals down, and I find this, that I'm good with the main stuff, but with the snacks I can fall down because I want to keep them healthy. But sometimes when you're on the go and things are busy, you grab stuff that maybe isn't necessarily the best choice. So what are your recommendations for handy stuff that you can just grab?
Yeah. So for snacks, I recommend that they should always be based around fruit and vegetables because we're not meeting our guideline for fruit and vegetables, and they're so important for our health. In addition, it's especially for teenagers who need to get 5 portions of the dairy foods in. That's a lot. So a snack is another good opportunity to get one in.
Yeah.
So we have some pre-prepared snacks here to show you that are good options. And so the first one here is these are some whole wheat crackers. So they're whole wheats. They have fiber in them, which is good for our gut health. We have some cheese hiding underneath there under the tomato. So that's providing some calcium and some protein, and then the tomato on top, that's providing towards our requirement for fruit and veg.
Great.
Then we have the one beside it. This is some hummus with some carrot sticks. So the hummus is made from chickpeas, so that's going to provide us with some fibre and some protein, and then we're getting some vegetables. This is some yogurt with some fruit, some berries, some nuts and dried fruit. So we're getting a mixture of protein, calcium, fruit and veg, and fibre in there. And then the last one here is an apple chopped up with some peanut butter.
That's a firm favourite of mine, the apple and peanut butter, almond butter, any of the nut butters.
Yeah, very tasty.
Fabulous. Okay, and finally, Caoileann, we hear a lot lately about eating sustainably. And it's so important, but what exactly does it mean?
So a lot of people, when they think about eating sustainably, they think about water use and land use and greenhouse gas emissions, but really a sustainable diet is a bit more complicated. So that's certainly an important part of it, but a sustainable diet also needs to be nutritious, it needs to be culturally accessible and acceptable, and it needs to be affordable. So we have had some guidelines from the World Health Organization and the United Nations on what eating a sustainable diet should look like. And what they have recommended is that a sustainable diet should be abundant in fruit and vegetables and in whole grains. It should also be abundant in the legumes like the peas, beans and lentils. It should be moderate in dairy foods, and it should be moderate in chicken, poultry and fish. And it should have small amounts of red meat.
Okay.
So really, it lines up very well with the healthy eating guidelines and the food pyramid here in Ireland. So the key message, I think, is that a sustainable diet is plant-based, so like the food pyramid and the healthy eating guidelines, and it doesn't have to be plant-only. It can be plant-only, but you just have to be more careful with those nutrients you were talking about earlier that can be at risk unless you're careful to replace them.
Okay.
So by eating healthy guidelines according to the food pyramid, then you are eating a sustainable diet.
Okay. Well, look, fabulous array of different colours, and we know now all of the different food groups and what way we should eat them. We've no excuse but to be fabulously healthy this year. So Dr. Caoileann Murphy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Darren.